What if I told you there's a prison so dangerous? Even the guards are too scared to enter. Welcome to Ciudad Barrios in El Salvador, a jail that's not run by the government, but by one of the world's most violent gangs.
Suddenly, you're hit with the intense gaze of dozens locking onto you. These men described as the worst of the worst.
But how did things get this bad? And why did the government allow gang leaders to run their own prison? Ciudad Barrios. Prison is in a small town called San Miguel, in the eastern part of El Salvador. From the outside, it looks like a normal high-security prison. You'll see huge walls, guard towers, barbed wire, and heavy gates. If you didn't know better, you'd think the prison was tightly controlled by the government. But once you step inside, the story completely changes. Ciudad Barrios isn't like regular prisons. It's basically run by the inmates themselves, specifically a deadly gang called MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha.
Because there's always somebody standing here in front of the cells, and then if you look up, there's another corridor with more security personnel.
The police or prison officers only stay near the entrance. They don't dare step into the main prison yard unless there's an emergency. It's way too dangerous. So instead of the government running the prison, MS-13 leaders are the ones truly in charge. But the prison wasn't always this scary or dangerous. In the beginning, it was just a regular prison meant to hold people who broke the law. But things changed in 2003, when the government of El Salvador came up with a new plan to deal with growing gang violence. This plan was called Mano Dura, which means iron fist in English. The idea behind Mano Dura was pretty simple. Stop gangs by hitting them hard. The government thought the only way to control the gang problem was by arresting as many gang members as possible and locking them away for a long time. So, they started throwing thousands of young people into prison, many of them just for having tattoos or hanging out in the wrong neighborhood. But here's where things went wrong. Instead of spreading gang members across different prisons, the government decided to put all the members of the same gang in one place. For example, all the MS-13 members were put into Ciudad Barrios. The goal was to separate rival gangs and stop them from fighting inside the prison. At first, it might sound like a smart idea. If two dangerous gangs are always fighting, maybe it's better to keep them apart, right? But what the government didn't realize was that putting all the gang members together made them even stronger. Inside Ciudad Barrios, MS-13 members had space to breathe. There were no rivals, no one to challenge them. So instead of worrying about safety, they had time to plan, recruit new members, train young gangsters, and even run their gang from behind bars. Basically, they turned the prison into their own private base. The gang leaders started taking full control of everything inside. They handed out jobs, punished anyone who broke gang rules, and made sure their own system ran smoothly. Now picture this, a prison that was built to hold only 300 people. But right now, over 1,000 hardcore gang members live inside it. That's what Ciudad Barrios prison looks like on the inside. First of all, there are no prison uniforms. The inmates wear whatever they want, and most of them show off their gang tattoos proudly. You'll see men with full-body tattoos, faces completely covered with ink. Some have MS tattooed on their foreheads. Others have 666, or skulls and crosses on their necks, arms, and even eyelids. These tattoos aren't just for looks. They're symbols of loyalty, power, and violence. It tells everyone that they're part of something big and dangerous. But what's more shocking is that the gang completely controls life inside the prison. There are no real guards walking around inside. The police and prison officers don't even enter the main areas. They stay near the gates and let the gang leaders run the show. MS-13 has full control over everything. Who sleeps where? Who eats what? Who works? And even who gets punished.
Doctor tells me the inmates, once they're inside one of these sectors, they never leave. Everything is done within, including doctors, as well as legal visits or court hearings.
Each sector holds more than 24 large cells.
Yes, they actually give out jobs. There are people inside who cook, clean, do laundry, and even work in small workshops where they build furniture or fix things. But don't get it twisted. It's not out of kindness. It's all about keeping control and keeping everyone busy under gang rules. Believe it or not, they also have their own church inside the prison. There's a pastor, prayer sessions, and even worship music. But don't let that fool you. This isn't a peaceful or holy place. The church is just another way for gang leaders to keep order, look respectable, and maybe even influence new members to stay loyal. They also have their own set of rules, completely separate from the law. If someone breaks a gang rule, like stealing from another inmate or showing disrespect, they don't wait for a judge. The gang handles it themselves. Sometimes it's a beating. Other times, it's worse.
You gotta kill people, you gotta rob, you gotta do what you gotta do to survive.
You have to do those things.
Yeah, you gotta do that.
And if you didn't do those things, you wouldn't.
You wanna be a gangbanger.
The gang makes sure everyone follows their orders. If you try to go against them, you're finished. And the craziest part? There are no guards inside. Like, seriously. The police and prison officers only stay at the front gate. Once you go past that gate, it's completely run by the inmates themselves, most of them being members of the MS-13 gang. And when I say handled, I don't mean a slap on the wrist. There's no trial, no judge, no chance to explain yourself. The gang decides the punishment, and it can be super brutal. Sometimes they beat the person with sticks or bats. Other times, the punishment is even worse. Death. Yep. People have been killed inside Ciudad Barrios by their own gang for breaking the rules. Imagine living in a place where every single part of your life is controlled by a gang. You can't trust anyone. You have to follow every rule. And if you make one mistake, there's no one coming to help you. Not the police, not the government. It's just you and the gang. The government says they let this happen to keep rival gangs from fighting. Since Ciudad Barrios only has MS-13 members, there's no fighting with enemy gangs like 18th Street. So, in their view, separating the gangs like this keeps the violence down. But honestly, it feels more like the government just gave up.
Juan Carlos tells me he was wrongfully held for 5 months at a lower security prison earlier this year. He says the poor conditions led to an infection in his leg.
He said he was lumped in and assumed to be part of a gang. And he said in part because of how he looked, he had long hair, he said he had a long beard, and he says he has tattoos, but he points out that for him, these are just artistic expressions. They have nothing to do with being part of a gang.
So how dangerous is MS-13? Honestly, super dangerous. Most people think gangs just cause trouble in their own neighborhoods. But MS-13 is on a whole different level. They didn't even start in El Salvador. Believe it or not, they actually began in Los Angeles during the 1980s. A lot of young Salvadorans had moved to the US during a civil war and were trying to survive in tough areas. So they formed a gang to protect themselves. But after a few years, many of them got arrested and deported back to El Salvador. And once they got there, they took everything they had learned in LA, the violence, the structure, the gang culture, and used it to build a massive gang empire. Their motto is scary: Mata, Roba, Viola, Controla. It means kill, steal, torture, control. That's not just a saying. That's how they actually live. And here's the creepy part. Even from inside Ciudad Barrios prison, they're still running the show on the outside. So, after all this, you might be wondering, did the government's plan actually work? Short answer, number not even close. When El Salvador started the Mano Dura, or Iron Fist policy, the goal was to fight gang violence by locking up as many gang members as possible. They thought this would scare criminals, clean up the streets, and bring peace. But that's not what happened. What really happened was that the prison population exploded. Jails across the country became overcrowded like crazy. Some prisons were holding 3 times more people than they were built for. Ciudad Barrios, for example, was built for 300 people, but over 1,000 gang members live there now. And guess what? Violence didn't go away. Instead of reducing crime, all the violence and gang activity just moved inside the prisons. And once the gangs got comfortable running things behind bars, that violence started to spill back out into the streets. The prisons became like gang headquarters, where leaders planned attacks, gave orders, and stayed in full control, even from their jail cells.
And this is a book that has the markings of gang members.
All the marks.
The minister compiling his findings from his nearly 30 years in law enforcement to help interpret gang symbols.
The whole idea of scaring people straight didn't work. Instead of bringing order, this strategy brought chaos. Think about it. The government basically gave gangs a free space to grow, connect, and organize without much interference. Ciudad Barrios didn't feel like a place for punishment. It turned into a place for planning, recruiting, and running criminal operations. So, in the end, the Iron Fist policy just made things worse. Now, El Salvador has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world, and gang violence is still a huge problem. The prisons are packed, the streets are still dangerous, and the gangs are even more organized than before. But in 2012, a journalist from the New York Times got permission to visit Ciudad Barrios prison. That's a big deal because most people, especially outsiders, never get to see what goes on behind those walls. But this journalist got rare access, and what he found was seriously shocking. He didn't describe the place as just a prison. He called it a self-governing society. That means the prisoners were running everything by themselves, without any help or control from the guards or the government. He saw that the gang had its own leader, like a mayor, who was basically the top boss inside the prison. This guy made all the big decisions. There were prison medics, but not the kind you'd expect in a normal jail. These were gang members who took care of other inmates if they got hurt or sick. There were also rules and punishments, but again, not the legal kind. If someone broke a gang rule, they didn't go to court or meet with a lawyer. Instead, the gang handled it. The journalist saw that punishments were often done using baseball bats or even machetes. It was violent and brutal, and there was no one to stop it. At one point, the journalist talked to a prisoner and asked him a serious question. "Do you think MS-13 can ever be stopped?" The prisoner didn't even hesitate. He said, "Only when everyone is dead." That answer says a lot. Right now, the government of El Salvador is in a really tough spot. They don't have an easy answer to stop the gang problem. Every move they make seems to come with major problems. But if the government decides to negotiate with gangs, or just look the other way, then the gangs keep growing. They get richer, more powerful, and harder to stop later. So, it's kind of like being stuck between a rock and a hard place. In 2022, President Nayib Bukele came up with a very bold plan. He decided to go all in. He declared a state of emergency and ordered the arrest of more than 70,000 people who were suspected of being gang members. That's a massive number. He also built a huge new prison called the Mega Prison to lock them all up. It's one of the biggest prisons in Latin America, and it looks more like a military base than a jail. Bukele's plan was to completely wipe out gang violence by locking up everyone even remotely connected to gangs. Some people in El Salvador supported this and said they finally feel safer walking outside. But not everyone agrees. Critics and human rights groups are worried. They say that many innocent people were arrested just for having tattoos or living in rough neighborhoods. There are also reports of beatings, abuse, and no access to lawyers. Some families say their loved ones were taken without any proof. So now the big question is, does this extreme crackdown really solve the problem? Or does it just hide it for a while? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video informative, do like, share, and subscribe for more such deep dive content.